Good afternoon. Thanks everybody for joining us for today's session on delivering agentic AI at scale. Lovely to see so many of you for the conversation today. One that I am really excited about because we've got a brilliant panel to share with you. If I do some quick intros, I'm Sophie. I'll be hosting and moderating today. So I'm just going to do some introductions to our fab panel consisting of James Lupton, who's our CTO here at Cynozure, Lou Hutchins, our Director of Data Culture and Literacy, and of course, Jason Foster, our CEO. I always do a little bit of housekeeping at the start of these. You'll all be so used to these webinars by now, but if you have questions, you can pop those in the Q&A. But perhaps more importantly for the session today, we'll be using the chat. We really want to get your input and your engagement into the topics that we're going to talk about today. So if anybody wants to kick that off by letting us know where they're dialing in from, anything that they might want to particularly get out of the session today, please feel free to do so. We'll be using that chat to navigate some of the conversations today. Our panel are up for a challenge, so we'll be guided by some of the things that you post in there. For those of you who haven't come to a Cynozure session before, welcome. We are a data and AI strategy company helping clients of all different types, all different industries to fulfill their data potential. And what we mean by that is using data and AI in a way that delivers real business impact. We do that across a broad range of different services, anything through from strategy to culture to technology. Today specifically, we're talking about agentic AI, but we know, of course, that sometimes you need some input and expertise from those other branches of data to be successful. The panel today will draw on their experience working with all different types of clients. There's a few on the screen for you right now, some names you might recognise in there. But I think the reason that we always pop this on the screen is just to stress that there are so many ways of thinking and different experiences, different expertise that can be shared cross-industry, as well as inter-industry. And we're really keen to get your experience across today as well. So hopefully we can all take something away from the discussion today and learn something new. Okay, so without further ado, and starting our conversation for the afternoon, we'll be talking about agentic AI, and I think it's no surprise to anyone that AI projects are on the rise. We speak to so many organisations that are deploying more and more agentic AI tools. They're building and buying more and more tools and trying to get things into live production. One of the things that really struck us throughout the number of conversations that we've had on this topic is that whilst there is such a heavy focus on the technical elements of it, you often miss a lot of the things around the sides of that that allow you to scale well as an organisation. And of course, when we get to scaling and we get into production on various AI use cases, we can run into lots of different types of problems. I think some people in the room may have examples and some stories to share with us on that front. So we'll be looking today at what we can do to make sure everything we do around agentic AI can scale, can be really successful, and can deliver real business impact. James, if I can ask you just to tee everyone up, what do we mean when we're talking about agentic AI for the purpose of today's session?
Great. Well, I think there's now a definitely maturing definition of this appearing in the market, which is good. So when you speak to most people, you'll probably get a similar kind of answer to this. And on screen, I'd say these are kind of four of the main characteristics when we're talking about agentic AI. So firstly, it's goal orientated. So you're setting some kind of outcome, some kind of objective that the AI agent is working to. That might be a very small, very simple objective, helping you maybe just write a document of some sort, or it might be a massive objective like reducing customer churn in your organization. The second bit is about autonomy. So agents are acting in an autonomous way. They're able to go off They're able to make decisions. They're able to do things without constant direct supervision in order to achieve that goal. Third bit on there, action taking. So the agents will use tools, and whether that be access to an API or being able to load up a browser or run a whole operating system, whatever it happens to be, but they'll be able to take action and take effect. So again, that could be writing a document. It could be being able to go into HubSpot and send an email to someone. It could be rewriting the code for the website, you name it. And lastly, it's adaptive. So throughout, it is learning and iterating its approach to achieving that goal. So maybe it's got a big objective like reduce customer churn, and it's looking and it's monitoring at how well am I doing? Is customer churn going down? And if it's not, maybe I need to change my approach. So I think those are the kind of 4 characteristics when we think about an AI agent. But if you switch over to the next slide, this is a spectrum, and one that is maturing. So the way that perhaps we most commonly experience an agent right now, which would be its earliest, most simplistic incarnation, would be a reactive kind of tool. So for example, that would be like ChatGPT today, that it's not proactively doing anything. I'm going in, I'm giving it instructions, and it's using tools and it's taking action. Maybe it's going off browsing the internet for me. If anyone's used the new sort of agent functionality in there, you could have it hooked up to different APIs to call off to platforms. There's lots of things it can do, but it's reactive. I give it instruction, I have a conversation with it, we iterate. At the other end of the spectrum are autonomous multi-agent systems. So you can almost think of this like a business. This is a bunch of specialized agents working together to achieve that goal. So you might have agents specialized in coding, in writing, in strategy, in testing, in whatever it is, that are working together in order to get you to the outcome. And the sort of vision that I think the sort of agentic industry is putting out there at the moment would be that these would be those big, meaty, complex objectives, like, you know, drive customer acquisition for your business, that have large reaching change within your organization. Most people right now are down on that left-hand end of the spectrum, but I know we're already starting to see the real examples coming to life. And as you were saying, Sophie, a lot of people are racing now to do tools and to do and deliver agents into their businesses for both internal consumption and for customer facing activities. I know one of my teammates was describing to me the other day that he bought car insurance for his daughter, and it was entirely driven through an agentic experience. So it gathered some information, it gave him a price. He already had account, so it went and looked up the card and asked if it wanted to take payment on that. So this stuff is now starting to appear in terms of customer interaction as well. So jump on to the next one for me, please, Sophie. So there is a load of stuff that you have to do to be successful with AI. And even this picture is still fundamentally at a very high level of across all the activities that you need to do and deliver to be successful. We've definitely observed that a lot of people are racing to some of the more technology and delivery elements, which is great because that's where a lot of value is. But what's that leading to? It's leading to conversations where people go, well, we had some success with a POC, or maybe we didn't, and we want to take it further. We want to do more with it, but we haven't really got the ability to scale this out across the organization. So there's a whole bunch of additional things that you have to think about in order to successfully scale the technical implementations of AI in your organization. And actually, a lot of those things are nothing to do with the technology or even the data bits. It's things like that transformation where it's about change. It's about driving new operations and new processes. It's about your workforce. It's about setting the right strategy and so on. If we go on to the next slide, you know, that's the 50,000 foot view here. Then there's a next level down, and indeed there's a next level down beneath this. So based on some work we've been doing with customers recently on trying to answer this question, we've created a sort of exercise that we work through with customers to help them both do some learning and appreciation about the breadth of topics to consider, as well as do some planning to figure out the prioritization, and have created this sort of set of cards to help guide people through that exercise. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. So the format of the webinar, a bit different to how you might normally see one run, hopefully. So in a second, I'm going to be joined by Jason and Lou, and we're going to talk through some of these. We won't have time to get through every single topic and area today, but we're going to be chatting through some of these cards, what's important about them, the kind of considerations you ought to take into account, where might their relative priority be in terms of, if you're tackling this, you've got limited capacity, limited resources, where should you think about perhaps starting first? And I'm going to be sharing these into the chat as we go. So keep an eye on the chat, and Sophie will be adding in some little vote buttons in there through emojis, a 1, 2, and a 3 that you guys can engage with. So a 1 would be if you think this is something that's like an early priority, something you would do, say, in the first 6 months, the now of delivering and trying to scale agentic AI. 2, maybe next. So after that initial wave of priorities, that second 6 months, what might you focus on? And 3, beyond that, what's something that can perhaps wait till later? And definitely get that vote in the chat, but we're also keen to hear from you, throw in your opinions and views as we go. And Sophie's going to be keeping an eye in there. So with that in mind, Jason, Lou, if you would like to join me, and I'm going to pop in the first one into the chat that we're going to be discussing, which Sophie will quickly add those emojis on to vote. And I've tried to pick out from these cards we're going to be chatting through some of the slightly different ones. So from the sort of strategy world to start with. Obviously, there's things in there like writing a strategy, thinking about vision, value, but one that I've started to see come up quite a bit and is an important one is making the right build versus buy decisions. So there's a whole load of stuff that you can do when it comes to implementing agentic AI, internal basic operational use cases through to transformational kind of customer journeys. And really what this ticket is about is thinking about, where should my effort focus internally? Where, if I'm going to develop something, should I spend my time and effort versus just buying a commodity off the shelf because it's not a differentiator for my business? How am I set up when it comes to my contracts, my partnerships with either consultancies, with technology vendors, with SIs, whatever it is? And do I understand the IP ownership and the arrangements we have in place? And making sure that what I build, I own. So, Jason, I'll throw this one over to you to start with. Kind of, where would this sit for you, and what are the kind of things you'd urge people to think about?
Yeah, I think for me, there's kind of two lenses on this one. There's the kind of macro strategic choice about generally whether you're an organization that needs to own or wants to own IP in technology and what you're building, and whether that and part of that decision comes from whether you need that or that does create value for your business in some way. Because if you're in the manufacturing game and you're manufacturing widgets or food or drink or whatever it is, then maybe owning IP of some technology isn't for you. But if you're a more digital organization that's and that might be in manufacturing as well, but that is someone who generally builds technology, generally builds solutions, and generally get some value add in their industry because they are able to own the IP of technology, then I think that's an option to go down. So there's a strategic choice generally about whether you want to own IP and therefore whether you build or buy. But then there's also a case by case decision, kind of like use case, a piece of work perspective that depends on the scope, the objective of it, the outcome you're trying to get to, the uniqueness of the solution, whether that all exists already, and again, whether there's any value in you building it yourself. So there's a kind of top level, generally, what do we do? And that should sort of frame our decisions. And then on a case by case, you're sort of really thinking about, well, do I go our normal route, or do we go somewhere else this time because there's something special about it? And then the third point I'd make is that that it sort of depends on the data as well. So if this is about a model that you're deploying, some automation maybe that you're deploying, and it's more technology focused, then that's one choice. But if there's something unique about the data that either you're capturing, creating, or flowing through that as a system, then again, that might take you a different route as well.
Really interesting. So it has to line up with more broadly the strategy and approach that you tend to taking these things. Ideally, that would really benefit you. And it's interesting you call that out, because across our clients, I know I've seen some build their own core platforms, whether that's sort of an ERP or CRM or whatever it is, build that in-house. And actually some of them have been really well positioned when it comes to advancing this agentic journey, because they own the tech stack, so they are able to really influence how things integrate and how they change journeys, versus relying on, say, Salesforce or SAP or whatever you happen to use to roll out tools as part of the suite. But it's not for everyone. Not everyone is an IP builder.
Yeah, it also depends on the maturity of the thing as well. So I remember years back we built a model that looked at different words that were being said in social media and came up with the sentiment. So it was like a sentiment analyzer. Back then they didn't exist. Now almost you wouldn't bother, because you can just buy it or download it. So it sort of depends on how mature the thing is that you're trying to implement, and that might change whether you build or buy as well.
What about you, Lou?
Yeah, I kind of echo that. I think, ultimately you want to make sure that if you're investing in building your own capability, it's because it's something unique that solves a unique problem for your organization. But there are so many macro tools out there now that you could probably lift and shift and buy off the shelf. So I think it's understanding what is the problem you're trying to solve for, how unique is it for your business, and from a data perspective, how important that data set and the accessibility to that data is for you in solving that problem. So yeah, it's probably not a one size fits all, is it? It may be a blend depending on what the problem is you're trying to solve.
And looking in the chat, I can see most of the votes going to this should be an early priority, something you figure out the front of the journey, which makes a lot of sense. If you're embarking on this stuff, you don't want to have wasted investment or build things that you then don't own the IP for example, because you weren't set up right at the start. But what do you think, is this something that people should be sitting down and nailing early on?
I personally think it's a good one to make, certainly that strategic choice one. Which direction do we go generally? And then through the rest of the journey, it's that case by case that I mentioned. But I suppose if I go up a level of where I would counter that is, as a country, the UK, for those that are here, but have gone of backing, a US based LLM as their kind of go forward AI partner. And other countries in Europe have gone sovereign and built their own, because they see the benefit of the IP related and lots of other things, not just IP actually, but protection and security and ownership and all these good things. So I do think you might be able to change modes, but it depends on where you make those investments, and you might start early on of using what's out there, and then later recognize that actually this is something we really should bring in house and build, because there's something unique or special, or the things, Lou, you said, are that make us, lead us down that path, instead of just going all in on a provider that you're then, wedded to for however long you end up sort of sticking with that as a solution.
Brilliant. And I guess to everyone watching in the chat, feel free to throw in there if you've got a different take or want to share your view, or why you've put the priority that you have in there. We're keen to hear from you and share with the others on the call. I'm going to move us on to the next one now. Again, Sophie will add the emojis to vote in a second. So the next one we're going to look at is about managing risk and compliance. So obviously governance has been one of the early dominating conversations when it's come to AI, especially in more risk-averse industries. This has been a common place for people to start. And this particular lens on it is about the understanding and baking in compliance to how you do things from the start. So understanding your regulatory landscape. What kind of world are you operating in? Example I use for this is sort of like consumer duty laws. If you're in sort of financial services, you've got an obligation to be able to make the right decisions for your customers, with an implication that you can explain those decisions. So black boxing away an agent that can't explain why it did or didn't offer someone something could cause you a problem. So you need to maybe start thinking early on, well, how would I, to a regulator, evidence something, as an example? Making sure that you've got clear accountability. AI is still one of those things where it can be slightly murky about who owns it in an organization and who's responsible. So establishing that clear accountability and owners, and how you're going to validate that you've got the right controls and risk management in place. And possibly one of my favorite ones in here is about planning for failover. So the sort of disaster recovery, business continuity world of things. Fast forward to a place where perhaps agents are doing a significant amount of work in your organization, and perhaps there's less humans that know how to do that job, or none at all, because you've embraced new opportunities and scale that you couldn't simply deliver with humans. What happens when it stops working? What happens when, like we had recently, AWS has an outage and your entire cloud estate is down, and that's stopping your business fundamentally transacting? Do you have the business continuity and DR plans in place and have the right level of resilience? So Lou, I'll chuck this to you first.
Yeah, I think this is such an important thing to consider. And my view is often that the governance and the compliance element is often the bit that people get less excited about because it's the non-sexy stuff, but it really is the foundational build in my mind of being successful. And within that, what we're often seeing as well is it's not just about your AI compliance and your managing of that risk, but it also should be about your data governance, your data management, and your data compliance as well, because ultimately these two things should come hand in hand. My gut is that this is something that should be thought about from the off. It's the foundation of your success, and knowing how you'd roll back if there is a challenge is so important. And we've all seen retailers in the press over the summer who've been through some horrible situations. And I think, ultimately having that business continuity in place, knowing how you would handle if there are challenges or issues is absolutely primary to the success. And also giving people the confidence within your organization that going an AI route is the right answer.
Indeed. It's interesting, that governance space as well. Like you say, there's a lot of overlap with how you're thinking about your data governance, with your broader corporate governance in there. And I think integrating with those existing processes and frameworks is often a good way to tackle this stuff as well, rather than trying to build parallel tracks of activities. And it's interesting with things like business continuity and disaster recovery. And, like you say, cyber threats generally are rising significantly, and that's a real test of this kind of stuff. I do wonder how many organizations are truly prepared or have done more than just a tabletop read of their business continuity plan and actually know how to handle it and put it into action. Let's just see where, again, strong upfront bias in the chat for this one of getting this kind of stuff right from the start. And I think some of these more than others personally. So, these tickets and cards combine a few different items that individually you might prioritize separately. But the regulatory one, I think, is a really good one to do up front myself, because you want to make sure you're not walking into a trap and putting yourself in an uncomfortable position. How do you keep your C-suite out of prison? But something like the failover DR business continuity, that might be something that waits a bit later as you get to maturity, as you start to figure out exactly where the use cases are and they start running in practice. That might be safe to come a bit later, perhaps with some initial just awareness up front that it is something you've got to think about. Wonderful. I'll keep us moving through onto our next one, and there's a lot of good chat going on in there. So our next one, run agents as a service. So again, Sophie will add some emojis on for our voting. So this is really in that operations space. This is thinking about, how do I actually deliver agents in my organization like a critical service that's got the right support wrap and support model in place, that's got SLAs established for it, so that I manage a proper, clear process with clear escalations, and planning for decommissioning. Fast-moving space, agents. How quickly can a model become out of date, uncompetitive, inefficient? How might it cease to serve the needs of the business over time? And do you have a way of monitoring and recognizing that and being able to replace, like you would a team member if they weren't performing in the role anymore? You would have a mechanism in place to deal with that. So operations is, I think, a really difficult one for people, in part because some of the skill sets perhaps involved with managing and supporting these things are difficult to attain and acquire, and not abundant on the market as well. Not the typical kind of thing you might find in a support team yet. So, Jason, what are your thoughts on this?
I come at this one from the view of thinking about agents more like a digital worker than a piece of technology. So certainly conceptually, to help think through some of the things that we need to consider, because and when we do that, and if you think about an agent sitting alongside, there's conversation about org structure here as well, which is, where do you put agents? Do they sit alongside your marketing team and your finance team, or do they sit in IT and are run by your CTO or whatever? But if we think these are agents that are doing the job of what a human would do, and they're going to sit alongside other humans doing, and together they combine to do the function of, say, HR, or the function of, say, marketing, then we can use some of the things that HR do when they think about how to run an organization, and the HR sort of policies and best practices, and how we deal with onboarding, how we deal with performance management of the agent, how we deal with training and improvement, how we deal with, as you mentioned, removing and offboarding people, and how we do that in terms of a digital worker perspective. So there's kind of like, if you think about this as these are replacing what a human would do, and we treat the way we think about running those agents as a service in the way that HR thinks about running humans as a service, which would be a horribly mechanical way of explaining what we all do, then I think you get to a really interesting place about how you design that service and design how they integrate into the kind of like the processes and workflows of the business, alongside any sort of IT management that you might need to do as well, because they're of course important, and there are some specific technical things that we need to do. And IT departments have a lot of history in things like versioning and release procedures and decommissioning and all these good things, which we shouldn't forget about when we're rolling out agents. So that combination of sort of HR management and tech management, I think, comes together quite nicely to create a service that thinks about and treats these things in a slightly different way.
I think that's maybe a decision that people are going to have to make, is, are you going to think about agents more like people, or more like a bit of IT and technology and a system, and where do you sit? Interesting comment in the chat from Mark that Workday are now letting you register agents in Workday as a resource alongside human capital. So already our HR vendors out there are moving in that direction as well, recognizing that kind of agent as a team member kind of model.
And you can, I think the good thing about, I suppose, agents, so if you think about sort of training up a human, that takes some time to develop the skills that people need in order to do a job, and then when you want another one of those, you need to go and recruit someone and then train them up or cross train, and that all takes time. It's not replicatable at all. When you've got an agent that can do a thing, it's copy paste. The agent then does the same thing as the previous agent, so you've got a level of replication that you don't have with skills in humans, so that's good. That brings sort of training costs down. But equally, you don't have, frankly, the HR challenges of removing underperforming agents. And this isn't to say we shouldn't therefore have humans in the loop, but this is to say that there's a different mode that we can use, whilst also treating them and doing the work of what is essentially replacing what a human would have done previously.
Lou, how about you?
Yeah, I was just mulling this one over. I think it's really interesting, because if you start to think about them in a human capacity and how you would manage them from an HR perspective, I think you also need to get really clear on what great looks like and what the expectation is of that agent. And I was just thinking then, alongside kind of where does this agent sit, there's then this cultural piece of taking the humans that might work alongside that agent along the journey. Because I think one of the things we see quite consistently happening at the moment when we're speaking to clients is there is a nervousness out there about agents taking their jobs. And so there's a cultural piece here for me, from an HR perspective as well, about managing that message in the right way and ensuring that we take people on the journey, but expecting as much from our agents in some respects as our humans, if not more, so that that conversation about why that cultural shift is happening becomes really, really important and considered. So yeah, it's a fascinating one. But also done wrongly could kill your business, particularly if it's around customer service and experience. So it's, where can you afford to play safely to begin with to test it.
Yeah, which is very much also down to the risk profile in your business and the appetite you've got to it. And I guess in some respects, the level of, does a competitor leveraging this stuff represent an existential threat to your organization? Do you need to be a first mover in order to simply survive, or can you wait and be a later adopter of these kind of tools and techniques once they're a little bit more proven out there in the market? Well, let's chat a little bit about workforce and people as we're focused on that one. So just to throw Lou and Jason off the order I said I was going to do this in, let's talk about organizing the workforce for AI. So there are a bunch of different things underneath this topic that we've just touched on a few of there, which includes all of that comms and building structures and so on. This one here that I've called out is thinking about that roles and structure piece. So thinking about how AI fits into your organization. Is it an IT-owned thing, or does every manager have or agents living within their team that they're responsible for doing all of that management of? How do workforce structures change? Is the traditional org chart now broken, and does it need to rapidly evolve into something new that is a mix of people and agents working together? And what does that do to traditional titles and roles and mid-level management and so on? And how does AI fit into people's job descriptions? And that's everything from, as a basic skill that they might need to have, like being able to use a spreadsheet or PowerPoint, for example, but they can use some level of AI, into, are they responsible for managing it? How does that change pay? So do jobs become more or less valuable in the market based on how AI is being used alongside it, for example? And what does performance look like in a world of AI? Are we expecting people to do 3 times as much work as the new baseline, and therefore we need to rejig that? Or are we got completely different expectations as to what this means for people's day to day? So Lou, you spend a lot of time with customers looking at some of the people, the operating model, the culture change side of things. So be keen to get your take first on this one.
Yeah, I mean, one of the conversations we have a lot of when we're kind of in organizations thinking about their operating model, how they drive capability and data and AI forward, is exactly what you've just lent in on, James, which is, are we even calling it out as a skill set for the future? And the answer, in my humble experience, is very rarely do we call out the expectation to be data literate, to be able to use data, to be able to use AI. And so I can see that there is a need state here to culturally get people into a space to think about the fact that AI really probably will be touching every single role within a business potentially, and how you're factoring that in. So I think it's really important from a HR, culture and mindset perspective to think about that impact. I think that most organizations that I'm speaking to at the moment are just grappling with where they should put AI in. Should they put AI in? And actually, what are the use cases that it's solving for? So we haven't quite got into the granularity of enterprise design to include AI, but it's something that I think should be factored in for the future. And even when we're thinking about that level of efficiency, it becomes a really interesting thing, because I think what we're seeing at the moment is sensitivities around, if AI comes into the mix, my job is gone. And that creates sometimes a resistance to even embracing AI as a change factor within the organization, because people are worried about what it means for them. There isn't enough probably upfront thinking in organizations to culturally manage that message in the right way. And so what it does create is a nervousness. And I think that there needs to be a better consideration at an HR level on the impact in the business. And I think it's really interesting when you said, where does it sit? Should it sit in IT? Should it sit in the business? It's a bit like the debate we have with the data, right? It's a team sport. It should probably have ownership in some capacity across the whole organization, so everyone takes accountability and responsibility for the part they play in using AI to drive their jobs. And it shouldn't just be this thing that sits in the corner. But I think even with data, that's a cultural mindset shift that not everyone is on the journey of. And so I think it's something that should be openly talked about, but probably isn't being lent in or solved for fully at the moment, would be my view.
It's really interesting. And the nervousness and fear that this can create, I think, that's a very real thing, especially if a rollout isn't planned well and communicated to people, and the journey and the training and the opportunities and what this is going to do isn't communicated. I know Keith in our team, our director of solution architecture, has a great way of thinking about the skills bit here, which is that AI isn't a 10x for people. It's not that, if you're a 5 out of 10, you become a 50. It's a square. It's, if you're a 5, you can become a 25. If you're a 10, you can become 100. But if you're a 1 at something, you remain a 1, because you don't fundamentally get better if you can't, if you're not a domain expert, if you don't understand what you're doing. AI is there to really empower you, but you need to have some good level of starting point in order to get the most out of these things. And the better you are, the faster it can make you go as well.
Yeah.
Can I just to add, there's with the best will in the world, like and we're seeing a lot of these sort of 1s and some 2s, and of course it's always now or next, and a lot of this does need to be thought of up front. But for me on this one, you can plan for how you think this will pan out. A lot of this is new. The right hand side of your slide, James, about autonomous workforce agents, multi-threaded agents. Most people don't know what that looks or feels like, so we can't necessarily design for it. So some of it's a journey of discovery, and therefore you can only plan so far up front, but you should certainly have some thinking. But equally, disruptive technology does crash the system, right? It crashes what you plan and what you think, and it sideswipes you. And there's some organizations being set up by a single person in their room and fully agent driven. So the organization of the future will look very different from the organization of today.
Yeah.
So that's a big gap to kind of like to manage around. So in some ways, for me, this is actually about and thinking about the impact it has on the individuals in your organization is, how do you bring those people along with you? How do you have a level of transparency in the conversation so that you're clear about what you are and aren't planning? Do they understand your cultural norm about what they expect the organization to do when new technology, new innovation comes into play? Do we have an obligation as an organization to make sure that for every role we don't keep, we do something else to ensure we're not making the situation worse for society? There's all these kind of things. So I think there's a level of planning that you can do, but equally I think a level of transparency and communication is actually what keeps people kind of on side with making the change that you want to make.
Yeah, I think that's so important, Jay. So one of the interesting conversations I had in the summer was with one of our clients who said, we're mandating nobody's allowed to use AI. And I just went, oh, dude, the train's left the station. And if you're mandating that, there will be individuals in your business, I guarantee, that will be using it regardless. And actually, without you having that transparent view of how to use it effectively, people would just make up their own rules. And so I think that transparency and honesty about how it fits into the organization you work in is incredibly important.
That's a really interesting one, is you have to get out in front of this, because like you say, people are using this, that number is growing every day, and you're just holding yourself back. Your competitors are not using it, and they are getting faster and better, and they're learning where it doesn't work and where it does work and how to get the most out of it as well, so that as they push forward, they're gaining an ever increasing advantage over you. So
exactly,
got to manage that from the start. I'm going to take us on to the next one then, and looking just in the chat there, Sam had called out that presenting customers with incorrect data is a key worry and risk for them, and that takes us neatly into the data one about securing data, permissions, and privacy. So any good agent that's adding real value is going to need access to data in your business to do its job, and it's going to need the ability not only to read it, but to update it, change it, potentially delete it, because it's going to be interacting, it's going to be taking through a journey. So thinking through all of the life cycles, all of the customer journeys, all of the internal user journeys, what do they need to do, and what data is going to be required? Where does that data live? What systems is it going to need to interact with, is really important. So a lot of this is actually, especially with our sort of agent as a human workforce kind of member hat on is, well, in the same way that I give people data permissions, I need to do the same with agents. I need to approach this with privilege, principles of least privilege, and only giving them what they need to do the job. I need to make sure that my wider business systems support the right level of granularity and control to make sure that an agent doesn't go and give the wrong customer information about someone else, as an example, or allow for new types of cyber attacks where you're getting you're convincing an agent to go and delete everything in the customer database because it's got the permissions to do it, and you've broken the prompt in a support chat, for example. Like, I'm sure we'll start hearing those kind of horror stories where people have managed this badly. Obviously, we live and breathe data every day, and kind of good data permissions and security is a just fundamental part of doing this stuff well, regardless of whether it's AI or not. So, Jason, what are your thoughts? Is there anything different to think about here?
I think the data side of this is in some ways straightforward. You need a good, solid data foundation, clean, trusted data, good controls in the same way that we've always needed. Often it wasn't getting, funding to do those sorts of things. And we've got a whole separate session probably on how to approach that. But there is a need to have, specifically when agents are integrating with your data. You don't need to sort all your data out just to use Copilot or ChatGPT. That's not interacting with your data. But if you're using your data in these systems, of course, that needs strong foundation. But I think the security side of this is interesting, and I suppose the kind of the broader context here is there is heightened cyber incidents in the world right now, and risks are going up. So and the impact of those is huge, not just to the organization. So the attacks on JLR and M&S have hurt the UK economy, not just those organizations and their supply chain as well. So it's beyond just the kind of like four walls and just outside those organizations. So the risks are really high. The heightened attacks, there is no room for screw up, and the cost of insurance as well is astronomical. So getting this stuff right is really important. Securing yourself is important. Having the insurance policy that if and ultimately when something goes wrong, you're well looked after. So I think this is a sort of no-brainer, right? In some ways, just given the risk, I'd put this at the top of the list at the moment, where we are now, rather than just something that we need to look at.
But the chat certainly agrees with you, because 100% of people have said this is a number one top priority to do there. So nobody being brave enough to dissent and say, I'll worry about data access controls later. And I would agree. I think this is the kind of thing that if you don't get right early on, you are just asking for trouble down the line. And it may even get harder and harder to detect whether you've had a breach as well. If you've got these agents having conversations, doing things with a bad actor, it's not self-reporting that there's a problem. You might not easily track that something's going wrong if you haven't got the right kind of controls and monitoring in place around those chats, which is a whole nother part of what you have to think about to scale this stuff properly.
Yeah, there's obviously right sizing of this, so that doesn't necessarily mean big, huge investment, Rolls-Royce solution, but it needs to be contextual to the, data set it's got access to, the criticality of the job it's performing, the level of operational embeddedness, if that's a word, whether it's customer facing or something that's dealing with a back office function. Like, I think it depends on those things. So I think it's right sizing and scaling, but certainly day one with the first release, you've got a new paradigm that you're managing, and we've got to have this. Yeah, we've really got to have this thought through.
Yeah. Just with an eye on time, I'm going to give us one quick last one to discuss. And this one's slightly different from when we sort of do this exercise with people in person. And this is about use cases. So I picked one of the cards from this sort of exercise, use case 3. When should I start doing use cases? Is that day one I need to get something done, whether it's big or small, or should I wait a while until I've sorted my data access controls out and put in place some governance and thought about some of the other things? Where does this sit? When should I start thinking about delivering a use case? Lou, why don't you start?
Oh, I mean, I would always challenge that if you're doing something for the sake of it and it's not laddering back up into unlocking business value, why are you doing it? And it's the same conversation we have around data all the time. So I have also seen people try to retrospectively justify why they've spent money on Copilot licenses, but then nobody's using it. And why did we put it in? And actually, what was the purpose of it? So I think there should be a sense of how it unlocks value within your business. And if you can't articulate that at some level, it doesn't necessarily immediately need to be at a use case level, but I think you need to know what are the problems you're trying to solve for before you start to make a heavy investment. And then there's probably a piece of, and then are you set up for success to deliver that effectively? But my gut is we shouldn't just be doing things for the fun of it. We should know that it's genuinely going to add and change and improvement, drive return on investment before we start spending a load of money on shiny things. That would be my initial gut feel.
I agree with that. It's not really, is it the beginning, the middle, or the end? It's all based. All of the rest of the things should be done based on this. This is underneath them all. So you've got to do all the other things in context of the use case that you're building, or use cases that you plan to build. And particularly if you're going, there we go, Andrea, thank you. Use case is day zero. It's the thing you build around. And actually, there's a question that Clive's put in about best approach to running pilots, and actually one of the main pieces of advice is what we're just talking about here, which is build the pilot around a specific use case and an outcome that you're trying to solve, not just testing technology, but testing an improvement in the outcome that you're trying to achieve. And then the second thing I would say is define the success criteria for that. And that's, again, beyond does the technology work? It's much more beyond, does it drive an impactful change in an organization? Do the people around that understand the impact of that and how their roles would need to change? And the third one is around build it with cross-functional teams. So this shouldn't be, the AI team in a room running a pilot. This should be a cross-functional team that cares about and is focused on this outcome based on the use case that we just talked about, are clear on what success criteria and good looks like, and then work together to assess through the process and through the workflow that you go through that the pilot does what we expect it to be.
You stole what I was going to say as my number one bit of advice there, which is definitely have a really clear success criteria for what it is that you're trying to prove. But the little bit I'd build on that is think about the human baseline that you might be comparing this to. So if this, for example, was, can I have a support agent chat and deal with customer support queries? Well, if you're setting the expectation of 100% of queries handled perfectly and with a happy conclusion, etc., is that really a realistic baseline? What would the human experience be currently for customers, and am I improving on that? Because I think it's easy, because of the expectations people often have for machines and technology generally, to set the bar higher than is really achievable and way beyond what you might expect if you're putting a human into the role. I'm conscious of time, and we're just about over what we've got today. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope that was a really useful discussion. We've really just scratched the surface of all of these topics, and even the view we've got on screen here, which has been designed as an exercise we can run with people, is still aggregated up from a bunch of lower level tasks and points and activities and things you have to think about. Sophie, I'll pass over to you to wrap us up.
Thank you. And just big thank you for everyone for sharing so openly in the chat there. Like, we wouldn't have been able to have that discussion, and it was a risk that we realised before we started this session today, based on whether people would be willing to share and vote. So thank you so much. One of the things that I think I take away from listening to that is this can be used as a really good education tool if you're on the journey of bringing your exec along around, and teaching them, talking to them about all the things they might need to consider when we're rolling out different AI agents. These types of conversations can really facilitate getting to a conclusion on that. It also really aids planning what your priorities should be around agentic AI as well, and we can look at where we need investment now, where we need to put some resources in for the next year. So it's been great to see where everybody is on that journey. And of course, if you would like to talk to us more about where we can support you on that journey, we always willing to help. I think all I've got to say then is massive thank you to everybody that's joining, and a massive thank you to our brilliant panel in James, Lou and Jason. Thanks for your insights. And I hope to see you again on a future session.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.